In my first Black Myth Wukong video, I said that the game had grown a reputation for being one of the hardest games released into the gaming market in recent years, and a few of you disagreed. So I decided to up the difficulty and beat the game using only starter gear. This meant no armor upgrades and no weapon upgrades. Can I beat the game? Let's find out. Now, before this video starts, I just wanted to quickly say that I'm not going to be showing every boss fight, because otherwise this video would be incredibly long. I hope you understand and I hope you enjoy the video. The rules for this challenge are simple. All armor and weapons must remain starter gear until I get Wukong's helmet, where I will then switch to the lowest defense helmet I have available. The starter gourd cannot be changed, but it can be upgraded to allow for more heals. All soaks obtained during the game can be put on the gourd and can be changed at will. Spirits, vessels, and curios are all allowed to be used and changed at will. As you can see in the tutorial, we've already failed this challenge. Sadly, you need to complete the tutorial to play the game, and you can't control the armor you wear. So we'll just quickly get through the tutorial and actually start the challenge. The first chapters include a few bosses, the first of which is the bully guard. Thankfully, these first few chapters won't be super difficult because for the most part, it is just playing the game how you normally would. I didn't experience any issues with the bully guard and managed to defeat him really quick. The next boss I would be facing is Daajjeey. Thankfully, this boss wouldn't be hard as long as I dodged most of his attacks and avoided taking any burn damage. It wouldn't be a hard fight, but gaining access to the transformation spell would be one of the most vital spells for this run to succeed. Not only would it make most of the chapter 1 bosses a walk in the park, it would carry me through until I could get Spellbinder in chapter 3. I was really nervous for the Wandering White fight, considering on my first run through the game, I spent so much time fighting him. But turns out, I didn't need to worry, because I had spent all that time on the Wandering White in my first playthrough. I was used to his attacks, and I know how to dodge them. For anyone that hasn't beat this boss before, he's easily one of the most difficult bosses of chapter 1. But I managed to defeat him first try and not get hit even once. Next up is Daajjeey. Like I said at the start, the first few fights would be easy because it's how you already play the game. Daajjeey is a perfect example of that. There really wasn't any challenge here. I dodged his launch attack and mainly used my transformation to activate burn on him and deal damage when I could. He definitely is one of the easiest bosses in chapter 1. Next up is the good old Snake Tamer. I was a bit nervous going into this fight just because here is where I would experience poison damage. If I wasn't careful during the fight, I would need to decide if I was going to go and try and take out the snakes he spawns in, or just wait them out. I came to the conclusion that waiting them out was a lot easier and the better play, so I wouldn't get terribly poisoned. Once making that decision, the boss really didn't pose much of a threat. His wind attacks were easy to dodge, and as long as I stayed decently close to him, he was easy to damage and defeat. And now the White-clad Noble would be a bit more of a challenge. By now you should have stronger armor and a stronger weapon, allowing you to go through this fight easily. But that wasn't the case for me. Due to only having starting weapons and armor, I really needed to be careful about how much damage I took in the first phase so I'd have enough heals for the second phase. Thankfully, with most of his attacks being charge up attacks or 3-hit combos, they weren't terribly hard to dodge. The second phase proved to be easier than expected, with me just dodging most combos and attacking when I would have the chance. This would allow me to defeat the White-clad Noble quite easily. The Black Wind King would be so easy due to the fact that most of his attacks left massive openings, allowing for me to gain focus easy. His cloud form was easy to dodge by just listening for the audio cues, and in the end, he didn't pose much of a challenge. Even though my damage numbers were lacking, being able to do so much damage in those gaps just made it so easy. He wasn't really challenging, and I ended up defeating him quick. I'd finally be up to the Black Bear Guai. He is where I would start to really notice the drop off in my damage output. I wasn't doing anywhere near enough damage, so I'd need to get really good at dodging his attacks to make it possible to live long enough to defeat him. I would use my transformation at the start because the fight would go on for so long that I'd end up getting it back during the fight. I'd use my fireproof mantle whenever he'd enter his fire state to try and negate as much fire damage as possible. It did take me quite a lot of attempts from dodging the fire damage and trying not to run out of hits in my gourd. It wasn't easy. However, I would eventually get a run where I managed to deal enough damage to finally beat the Black Bear Guai. With no hits in my gourd left and only half of my health left, I would obtain my first relic. Now the first main boss fight of chapter 2 would be the King of Flowing Sands and his second son. This fight was another one that really showed me how much I was lacking in my dodging ability. I took so much damage that, honestly, I shouldn't have won. The king was annoying, throwing rocks and stunning me like he always does, and dodging the second son's attacks just proved to be difficult because I had never really spent too much time on this fight. Thankfully, I had gotten used to my lack of damage and had learned ways to deal the most damage I could, but I still heavily relied on my transformation spell to defeat these guys. My next battle would be with Shigadang and the Stone Vanguard. I collected the last of my Buddha eyes and headed over to the Stone Vanguard fight. Some of you may complain about this, but I got the Stone Vanguard and Shigadang to fight. This was just to save some time, and considering both of them were super easy fights, I didn't see the issue in using an in-game feature to make these first few chapters go a bit quicker. Shigadang destroyed the Stone Vanguard, and I then headed over and destroyed Shigadang first try. The first Prince fight isn't difficult, and for anyone that is half decent at this game, you would know what I mean. I dodged his charge attacks and tailspin attacks, and ended up doing most of my damage with my clones and my transformation. This fight really wasn't a challenge, even with my lack of defense and attack. The Tiger Vanguard, like usual, took a few attempts. His damage and attack combos made him a difficult boss to challenge. Thankfully, I picked up his combos pretty quick, being able to actually dodge his attacks and get some damage in between attacks. The fight did take quite a while, and with each failed attempt, I was definitely not happy. But eventually, I finally defeated him, with the Tiger Vanguard being easily the most difficult boss so far. The Yellow Road Squire isn't a hard fight in general. Most of his attacks are easy to read, and he doesn't have a high defense, making it super easy for me to destroy him. I still need to be aware of the fact I take insane amounts of damage, but in the end, he ended up getting beat quite quick, making him one of the easiest bosses in all of chapter 2. The Fuban is one of the easiest fights in the game. Not only are its attacks slow and sluggish, it doesn't even do a lot of damage. I assumed phase 1 would be a challenge, but I was poorly mistaken. Besides for needing to dodge more attacks than I was used to because of my lack of damage, there wasn't much risk in general, and second phase went by like it was nothing. With the Wind Sage joining me and doing most of the damage, the second phase was over in the blink of an eye, allowing me to get my bell and proceed to the final fight of chapter 2. The Yellow Wind Sage is usually a very difficult fight. From his massive damage with some of his attacks to him constantly moving around, he makes it hard to land a lot of blows in one go. Thankfully, because I've spent so much time fighting this boss, and because I had the bell, the Yellow Wind Sage wasn't that hard. His combos are so easy to read and just as easy to dodge. Even though the fight dragged on, nothing really happened. When he went to second stage, I instantly used my bell to push him out of it, making it an easy win. Chapter 3 starts with the Macau Chief. He really isn't a difficult fight. Even though I wasn't able to do much damage, there was plenty of chances to make up for it in his attack combos, with some of them leaving him open for punishment for long periods of time. I spent most of the fight staggering him with light attack combos and then continued to hit him until he got up and started to fight back. And for the most part, I would just rinse and repeat this, throwing in some charged attacks along the way for extra staggers. He's truly not a hard boss, even with only the beginning gear. Kang Jinlong made me regret ever being born. Due to this boss spending more time in the air than on the ground fighting me, I was getting pissed off. Between the limited damage chances and the mass damage the boss did, I was losing my mind. I genuinely raged so much fighting this guy, and even after finishing the challenge, this boss was still one of the most rage-inducing fights in this entire challenge. I needed to stay back and try to stun him. When I did manage to stun him, I would use my transformation and my spirit to deal as much damage as I could. Thankfully, my determination to defeat this boss paid off, and I managed to defeat him without breaking anything. Next up is Kang Jin Star. This boss is usually one of the more difficult bosses of chapter 3, from the lightning affinity to having attacks that felt almost impossible to dodge. She was a real skill check to see if you had what it took to move on through the game. Well, I wasn't going to let her stop me. Even though I had a wooden stick that hit as hard as a wet napkin, and armor that was pretty much made out of cardboard, I wasn't backing down. This boss is another fight with very predictable and easy to dodge attacks. Because I knew this going into the fight, it really didn't take me long before I managed to defeat her and free Daajjeey. Our next important boss is the green capped martialist. This is because he is the secret boss that will give me the spellbinder spell. When defeating him, it took quite a few attempts. Not only was he really tanky, he also moved around a lot and had some very dangerous combos, making him a force to be reckoned with. After a few attempts, I managed to only just defeat him, but it was so worth it with me acquiring spellbinder. I would now sacrifice the ability to use my other spells, but I would get a great increase in defense and attack, somewhat evening the playing field in future fights. Captain Cavalwave is probably the easiest boss in the entire game, with him barely attacking and being really easy to stagger. I'm surprised he is even classified as boss. Not to say he isn't a cool boss, his ability to manipulate blood is awesome, but for it to be as easy as it was with starter gear, kinda tells you all you need to know about this fight. Yellowbrow stage 1 is usually one of the easiest starts to a boss fight you can get. He stands around doing slow attacks and he doesn't usually do much damage in return. But that is the opposite when it comes to doing this with only starter gear. Not only did I not do a lot of damage, but he did a lot of damage in return. His giant lightning attack that damages everything in the room would one-tap me unless I was full HP. Eventually, I got through this stage and got sucked up into his sack. Now that I was in Yellowbrow's sack, I would now need to defeat the Macau Chief for the final time. Thankfully, this fight wasn't hard. Obviously, I still lacking damage and damage resistance, but because most of his combos aren't too deadly and he has massive tells on when he's going to strike, it made it easy to damage him. The hardest part was easily trying to see through all of the red mist that surrounds the arena. In the end, I defeated the Macau Chief for the final time. After becoming the Macau Chief and getting to rampage my way through all of the stone statues, I'd finally be able to face Yellowbrow's final battle. There are a few attacks I would need to be careful of in this fight, one being his giant lightning strike attack and another one being his lightning weapon. These two attacks would not only wipe my health, but they could even stun me until he attacked again and finished me off. I managed to get used to when he would turn gold, I would sit back and focus on perfectly dodging to build up focus so I could knock him out of that state. This seemed to be quite effective. I managed to push him into phase 2 and not long after, phase 3. The pressure was really on, it was now or never. Thankfully, my spellbinder was making me do more damage, allowing me to equal the playing field and finish off Yellowbrow. Chapter 4 starts off with your first boss fight with the second sister. She can be a difficult fight, but because I have spellbinder, my damage wasn't an issue. This allowed me to tear through her and made it so most of the attacks she landed on me didn't do as much damage as you would expect, pretty much allowing me to not really worry about dodging as much, and mainly just allowing me to focus on attacking. But Eastover's right hand isn't that hard, the worst part being that the hand doesn't stay still long enough for you to do combos. Its only unique change is that it ends up being a different creature, but it doesn't end up changing the fight too much, making this fight one of the most lackluster fights of the run. Not to say I didn't struggle with this boss, with me being in chapter 4 but only doing chapter 1's level of damage, every fight was at least slightly challenging. Daajjeey stage 1 can be a difficult fight if you're not prepared, but because I have my bell from chapter 2 which increases my damage resistance and spellbinder from chapter 3, this first fight was a piece of cake. I mostly staggered him in the corner, keeping up my combos and dealing tons of damage to him. This was another one of the easiest fights in the entire game. Once Daajjeey ran away, I continued to hunt him down. Stage 2 of this fight was the complete opposite of stage 1. Not only did Daajjeey continue to kill me time and time again, his combos made him difficult to get any good damage on, so I decided to go and fight some more bosses and return back later. The Venom Taoist is another easy fight. I decided to bully this boss because of how easy he is, and defeat him just by taking off his arms, and getting the piece of armor I can't even use. Even though he is an easy boss, he is vital to getting the needle for the final boss. The second fight with Daajjeey is terrible. I couldn't do much damage and I lacked so much in defense that I'd be wiped off the map every time I challenged him, and that wasn't even the worst part of the fight. After finally dealing enough damage, he'd continue to transform, and there'd be zero chances to do damage to him besides for when he was in his boar state. The Rhino transformation would do enough damage to wipe me from full health, and the fish did such awkward attacks that it made him terribly difficult to dodge. I eventually got into a pattern of dealing damage to him only when he was in his boar state, and focusing on dodging whenever he was in any other transformation. This did make the fight drag on, but in the end, that was the strategy that allowed me to beat him. The Violet Spider is a mid-tier fight. It isn't difficult, but it also isn't easy. From the poison damage that can be inflicted and the ability to make you hallucinate, it can go from an easy fight to a difficult one pretty quick. Thankfully, however, this boss isn't very damage resistant. She does a few attacks that can be annoying and can move around a lot, but the boss, even with only the starting gear, didn't stand a chance and I managed to destroy her. The second fight with the Venom Taoist really doesn't change too much about the fight. He ends up having the same openings as the first fight, and most of his attacks are just as easy to dodge. Even though he is a two-phase fight here, the second phase is the same as the first phase, and in the end, he stands no chance against me. However, now that I have defeated him, I can enter the Purple Mountain. The Dust Veil went from being such an easy fight when you're at the right level and have the correct armor and weapons to being one of the most brain-rotting, rage-inducing, desk-smashing boss fights. Because I liked attack, both phase 1 and 2 of this fight lasted ages. Every failed attempt was 7 minutes of gameplay. Even though some of his attacks were easy to dodge, the attacks that weren't dealt massive damage and made me hate this game. But I didn't give up. I kept pushing, knowing I was so close to finishing this chapter. I'd push through his first phase and move into second and die to some of his combos. That just did insane damage, but I kept going, and eventually I finally defeated him. For beating him, I received the needle that'd be required to beat the final boss of this chapter. The 100-Eye Taoist Master can be one of the most tedious and annoying fights, and to be honest, this time was no exception. His affinity to lightning means you can get shocked very easily, and he hits really hard and can stun lock you into combos even if you were prepared for the fight. One mistake can mean the end. And that doesn't change at all here. But I have spent so much time learning his combos that they were a lot easier than they would be for a normal player. The only thing that really let me down in this fight was my damage. After finally pushing him into his second phase, I used the needle I obtained for defeating the Dust Veil, and continued doing the same thing, dodging the same attacks and doing the same shitty amount of damage, until finally he fell. The first battle of chapter 5 is with the Pale Axe Stalwart. This fight is just annoying. Between one of the carts launching flaming rocks at you and there being enemies in the area that you need to fight whilst fighting the boss, it is very hectic. Thankfully, even though I was in starter gear, I was able to defeat him. Next up is the Brown Iron cart. This is the first card we face and shows us the moveset that every card afterwards will use. This moveset is very basic and super easy to dodge, strong weapons and armor or not. This card is one of the easiest bosses to defeat in the entire game, and I showed that by beating it first try. Quick as fire and fast as wind is our first double fight of chapter 5. Here's where my lack of damage for the chapter really starts to get me. Due to not being able to defeat one of the bosses really quick, I would need to dodge their attacks and wait until the one on the ground ran out of energy, and then damage him and rinse and repeat until he was defeated. For the flying boss, he would stagger himself, so I'd just wait until he was staggered, then damage him, and that was how I defeated him. My battle with Cloudy Mist and Misty Cloud can be described with one word: infuriating. With their massive damage and their combo attacks, I was losing my mind during this fight, but thankfully after I defeated Cloudy Mist, I was able to get Misty Cloud stuck in a rhythm of attack, where he would charge me, and I would hit him with a 3-tier charge attack. I'd back up and rinse and repeat, and even though I was one hit, I was able to defeat him. The Keeper of Flaming Mountain fight took me 3 attempts, each one draining me more and more. Phase 1 facing the Keeper was easy. Once he summoned in his ink minions, it got bad real quick. With the little damage they took, but the massive amount of damage they did, I was at a massive disadvantage. But that wasn't even the worst part. Even after I defeated the ink minions and the ink minotaur, I still was faced with the yin yang fish, and this boss was terrible. Thankfully, after dying twice and pushing through, I managed to defeat the yin yang fish and the Keeper of Flaming Mountains. The fight with Red Boy is one of the most difficult fights in the game, mainly his second phase. But let's first talk about the first phase. Not only does Red Boy have an arsenal of different combos, almost every single one of his attacks inflicts burn. This makes this a difficult fight to maintain health, and you need to be very strategical with your gourd uses. But this fight difficulty also was dreadful because of how little damage I did. In the small gaps in his attacks where I could finally do damage, the damage was tiny. I mean, the fight just dragged on until thankfully I beat him. After beating Red Boy's first phase, he then turns into the Yaksha King. Here is where this run would go from fun to making me want to throw my computer off my balcony. Not only were his attacks impossible to dodge without timing your dodge perfectly, the damage he did was insane. Some of his combos would stun lock you, and he'd then just wipe you off the face of the earth. But that's enough ranting. Eventually, with the support of my chat and my determination to not let this boss be the end of me and this run, I locked in and just watched what happened. And with the defeat of the Yaksha King, I was finally free from Chapter 5. The Supreme Inspector is one of the most difficult fights of the game. It did take a few attempts, but after a while I started to be able to get perfect dodges with most of his attacks. This allowed me to get more strikes in and build up focus really easily. The only part I really struggled with was when he would trap you in his Ring of Fire. With my shitty defense and his constant attacks, perfect dodges were more important now than ever before. This would be a constantly reminder to me in each fight with every Chapter 6 boss. Hitting hard, but I would only hit as hard as a toddler with a bubble gun. After a while, I managed to beat the Supreme Inspector. The Gold Armored Rhino is a really long drawn out fight, from his regenerative horn to the fact you can't do damage to anywhere but his face for most of the fight. It can be a really long fight, especially when you're doing bare minimum damage. During this fight, I primarily focused on his charge attack. Whenever he would do this attack, I would use a charge hit to try and break his horn, stunning him and allowing me to go in and do some decent damage. As usual, my DPS was terrible, but it was definitely good enough to defeat this beast. After defeating the Rhino, I received the gold Shoju armor, instantly removing it and moving on to the next fight. My experience with the Clara treading deer was far from a happy one. Most of his attacks were easy to dodge, but his goddamn fucking tornadoes pissed me off terribly. Because of my minimum defense stat, if I got grabbed by even one of them, it was almost guaranteed death. This meant that I would need to go do damage little bit by little bit just to be able to push him into second phase. Once the deer had entered its second phase, its poison became my next biggest issue. Not only was most of the arena covered in areas where I could get poison, almost every attack the deer did would leave some more poison on the battlefield or inflict poison. I'd be lying if I didn't say this challenge was really infuriating me, but I kept my composure and finally defeated him after a few attempts. After defeating the deer, I received the Lotus Silk Cloud Treaders. Like with the chestplate, I removed them instantly for my ultimate armor. From ripping out the Fangtail General's antenna, I received the helmet. Because I can't remove a helmet, I felt the fairest course of action would be to put on the lowest defense helmet I had. Now to obtain the final piece of my armor, I would now fight the Emerald Armed Mantis. This fight is hard, and only because of one reason, the second phase, where not only does the boss's speed feel like it increases, but also his attack. The Mantis didn't take me anywhere near as long as it did on my first playthrough, but definitely still took a while. With his fast attacks, with my inability to seem to spot the pattern, I was shocked when I finally beat him after only a few attempts. After beating the Mantis, I got the Dian Saw braces, which I proceeded to instantly remove. After defeating the Emerald Armed Mantis, I went over and grabbed a Wukong staff, which instantly got replaced with my weapon from the gods, my starter staff. Erlang is a fight that no matter what, it will always haunt my dreams. Not only does he just proceed to bend you over and rail the shit out of you over and over again, but he has combos that last so long that I could leave, go to work, come back, and he'd still be doing his combo. Taking all of this into consideration, I'd like to believe that all of you would believe me when I say Erlang took me the longest time to defeat. After beating Erlang's first phase, I'd need to try and dodge some more aggressive attacks that made me feel like a fly getting swatted, and I'd also need to destroy his shield again. Once beating the second phase, here is where the challenge would actually begin. I wasn't able to do enough damage to take Erlang's shield down for a third time. This was due to the fact of my lack of damage and his combos making it almost impossible to get enough hits in before his shield would start regenning. This would mean I was left with no options but to slowly work down his regular health with heavy attacks and getting successive light attack combos. After enough tries, I finally managed to beat him. Thankfully, that would be the hardest part of this fight, considering the fact that we were now in our primal states, meaning my armor and weapons meant nothing to me. I'd proceed to defeat the 4 giants and beat Erlang into the ground, finally putting an end to the Erlang nightmare. The stone monkey would be my second last fight. Thankfully, it isn't that difficult of a fight. Once you learn the pattern, the hardest part of the fight is when the stone monkey clones himself. But due to them both having the same moveset and just tagging in and out, it made it so the stone monkey fight only took me a few tries. The Great Sage's Broken Shell is a difficult fight, hands down. From using level 4 charge attacks to being able to dodge your heavy attacks and remove all of your health with one combo, I was not going to take this fight lightly. Phase 1 of this fight was entirely about trying to get through the fight while using the least amount of heals. I primarily used the light attack combos because they were great at doing damage and stunning the Sage, allowing me to get through the phase with minimal damage taken. Phase 2 is where shit hit the fan. I went from being confident that I could do this to being absolutely shit on and bullied. Not only was the Sage doing so much damage, his combos got extended from 3 movements all the way up to 7. This meant that in some cases, I could be doing really well, and the next moment, I could get stun locked and destroyed by just a singular attack combo. This made it so important to focus on dodging. Thankfully, after 4 hours of fighting this boss, I finally got this right. With the Great Sage defeated, I'd beaten Black Myth Wukong with only starter gear. Thank you so much for watching, and if you made it all the way to the end of this video, consider liking and subscribing, and maybe even watching the video up on your screen right now.